I want some,
Ada said firmly. Me too, he said. But they aren't open, and I don't have any money.
I want some now, she snapped, pushing at the door.
Yeah, so do I, he said with a grin. Ada walked to the middle of the door, shoved roughly and fell forward. The door had a smaller door that hung from a hinge on top. It was too small for a person, but just right for a pet, and perfect for Ada. She looked back, flashed him a mischievous grin, and then she was gone.
Ada?
He asked, dropping to his knees before the flap. Panic crawled up his spine and filled his mind with all the different ways they could get in trouble. He couldn't yell louder. He might alert someone on the street. He was big enough to push through the door, but that might wake the owner. Clod stood and pressed his face against the shop window, trying to see what was going on. A shadowy little figure climbed up a chair and hopped over to the display. She leaned forward, breathing in the deliciousness, both increasing his worry and making him jealous. In all his life, he'd only had cake once, and it was like happiness you could eat. She lifted a hand over the frosting, ready to dig in. He shook his head, knowing that would be the worst thing she could do. This wasn't just cake, it was perfection, and she would... Then she did. The tiny hand dug deep into the wondrous morsel of frosting and produced a handful of bready goodness that she shoved into her mouth. Ada's eyes went wide as she fell back behind the cake out of sight. Clod tapped on the glass, and then again. The door creaked open, making him jump back and look up and down the street. The door opened more, and tiny Ada was beckoning him in. He shook his head even as she nodded with cheeks full of cake and her face smothered in red frosting. She was gone again, and he had no choice but to follow. He'd never made so much noise in his entire life. The hinges of the door needed oil, the wood floor needed nails, and he needed to be as light as a feather. Wishing and worry didn't help, as every footstep into the bakery seemed louder than the last. When he was finally certain that nobody was rushing into the room, he found Ada sitting on the display, stuffing her face. "What are you doing?" he whispered loudly.
It's so good,
she said, shoving handfuls of frosting into her mouth.
Have some.
I can't. We shouldn't, he said, his whispering filled with panic. We could ruin it, and... The cake already looked like it had been attacked by a small animal, and there was far too much damage to fix. Neither his magic nor the best baker in the city could have repaired that piece of art. He took in a deep whiff of baked goods and was immediately overwhelmed with hunger. Reluctantly, against every ounce of better judgment, Clod reached out with a large finger and dipped it deep into the red pastry. Life had never tasted better, and he was dizzy with wonder. The cake was actually more delicious than it looked. Footsteps upstairs made time stop. The shop owners. He stood there dumbfounded with a tasty finger in his mouth, listening to worried voices. "What's going on down there?" a woman shouted. "Gotta go," Clod said.
Break the cake,
Ada urged.
What?
He asked.
We already broke it, she said. They can't use it anymore. It will go to waste.
That made so much sense that Clod grabbed the top 2 layers and shoved his way out the door. They ran across the street and down the path, leaving angry voices far behind.